Welcome to Thrivable Studio. Today's episode is a special one, as we're inviting our first ever external guest into the studio, Marie Schiller. I've known Marie for 2+ years and have always admired her. So needless to say, I was excited when she accepted my invitation to sit down with us. Marie is the co-founder and CEO of Locasana and former VP at Eli Lilly within the drug delivery and device innovation team. So I figured it was appropriate to have her on to talk to us about the best way to bridge the gap between pharma companies and the patients that they serve to ensure market success. It's a topic we here at Thrivable are continuously having with our clients and industry partners, and I can't think of anyone better than Marie to unpack it with us. And with that, let's chat. All right, and welcome to the studio, Marie. Before we dig in, can you share a bit about your background and what drew you to brand development and commercial strategy in healthcare?
Hi, Adam. So nice to be here today. That's a long-winded question. We might need the whole podcast for me to sort of go through all of that. But in essence, I've always had sort of an innovation gene, and combine that with my love of problem solving and making a real difference in healthcare is what brought me down sort of really a product development path. Obviously, as you're thinking about product development, you're also thinking about the commercialization of that product and sort of how you position those products in a way that solves, some of the biggest problems that are out there. And I've done that in several capacities in a consulting role for many years, working across the industry, small companies, mid-sized to large, and then moving to Lilly, where I ran the brand development for insulins and connected care.
Thank you. We're really here to kind of dive into this idea about the clarity gap
Yeah.
and turning signal into certainty and kind of the struggles potentially with that today in pharma. So in your experience, how often do brand or commercial teams have to make major decisions without that full picture?
Yeah, when you look at the life cycle of a drug, you obviously have your sort of pre-launch period. I almost say that's the calm period where you can be very methodical about doing the right market research and doing testing in the marketplace. And then you sort of get and you launch. And it's at that pivot point where you start to say, okay, the market may move this way, but I planned it to move this way. So unless you've got a very well-constructed dynamic plan, you're inevitably going to get to some of those forks in the road where you've got to make decisions because the path you put in place isn't reaching the potential you thought, or the messaging that you've got on the product isn't being absorbed in the right way by the stakeholders that you're sharing it with. And it's at those points where you've got to make a decision. So think about it. You sort of, the IQVIA sales data that everybody uses to sort of monitor, you oftentimes are looking at that data and you're being asked, why isn't it working? Why isn't my plan being put together? And that uncomfortable feeling of needing to make a decision, the longer you wait to pivot, the bigger the impact is going to be on the top line. So you're between this rock and a hard place of trying to move fast, but you can't always get the right insight to make that decision. And so that is sort of this period where you sort of try to wrestle between having enough information to make an educated guess versus no data, but you're bleeding out and you really need to sort of deal with that in a triage situation to maybe I've got a little bit more time and I can seek through it. But it happens often. You can do as much planning as you want, but you could have even, and I'm talking about sort of brand positioning, but it could be market dynamics that change. There could be legislation that comes in, anything, and that you'd have to respond to and really be able to get the insights to make a good decision.
Given that, why do we think that gap, that knowledge gap is so common now? Why is that something that we're still struggling with? You think about the day that, we're in the age of innovation. What's causing that gap and why does that still exist?
If you go back and frankly, still the model today to how we capture information about customers in healthcare, right? Especially on the pharma side, you don't have direct contact with your customers in most instances. So you have to go out and do market research, right? You can do qualitative research, you can do quantitative research, but that is always sort of retrospective in nature. You're sort of going out and interviewing people and maybe trying to find out the insight for why a market moved in a direction that it didn't move in. Once you're responding to something, it's different when you're in pre-launch period, but that doesn't work in that it takes time, right? You're always sort of looking back versus looking ahead. In the ideal situation, I'd be walking into a leadership meeting saying, I know the sales aren't reflecting this yet, but I know this trend is going to come 8 weeks out because I'm seeing early signals from my source of insights that telling me we're seeing a change in the marketplace, or we're going to see a change in the marketplace because of these reasons. And it's just not how traditional market research is conducted today. And the world we're all living with AI, ideally you would be able to sort of type some of these into an engine and get a response, or do a predictive model that says, predict the 5 different ways that the market could evolve based on the insights of where we're sitting today. And there aren't products that are sort of doing this at the right scale today in the marketplace.
I would love for you to share a real life example where potentially you had a signal or maybe an early trend or performance shift that you were noticing, but you didn't feel like you had that clarity to really act confidently to move forward.
So it's a good question. And as I've mentioned, most of my direct responsibility has been on what we call global brand development. So it was sort of pre-launch of those products. But as being part of a leadership team within a therapeutic franchise, I was often part of those leadership discussions on sort of where we should turn commercially. And without going into specifics of any product that we were dealing with, it was oftentimes that we'd be sitting in the room, we'd have the analytics team, again, pull up the IQVIA data, and we'd see a change in new starts, or we weren't seeing the growth in the new starts of a product. And then the next natural question is why aren't we seeing that? And then the lead has to go back, and it's that trade-off on your KPIs, again, back to time versus certainty of making those decisions and what to do. And I've been in those shoes in the development side. Those are the times where you're starting a phase 3 study. You have to pick your endpoints. You cannot go wrong because these are hundreds of millions of dollars, these studies, and you got to make a decision because that trial's not going to stop, and it is a very important decision. So do I wish that there was this magic product that we could get all this information for? Yeah, I probably would have far less gray hairs if I had it.
I really want to kind of dive into what those risks are when you have incomplete data. You mentioned, missing KPIs and all that, but what kind of really speak to, really dive into in detail what those are.
You just reminded me, one of my mentors, or maybe it was even a boss, when I was doing connected care, so on the device side, it's a little bit different than on the therapeutic side, because on the device side, if you can adapt a bit. Analogy that was used with me was like, a therapeutic is like launching a rocket. You got like one chance to launch it, or one chance to do the phase 3 study. And if you're wrong and that thing's dead. Whereas on the device side, it's a little bit not as severe as that. You can adapt a little bit, and the timelines are different, and the size of the studies are different. So that's the risks are enormous when you start talking about the decisions that we have to make in drug development today, and they really aren't often gray. And you hear a lot of people talking now, Adam, about even the life cycle of a product. It used to be when you launched it, it would be, well, we've got till the end of the patent life. But now most people are saying the patent life is not the thing that is going to sort of take away share. It's going to be competitive entries in the marketplace. So if you start looking at the trends of drugs, it's like 5 to 7 years to sort of get the maximum amount out of that drug. That's why you see companies not going indication by indication, but they're going after 5 indications at once because they want to make that right decision. So it's caused a different pace that has to be in place as well. You used to be able to maybe learn from your launch in diabetes before you go out and have to launch in obesity, or vice versa. And now we're sort of seeing those back to back to back. So you're needing your level of insights, going back to the topic we're looking at, is just that much greater to make sure you're doing that in parallel versus learning and then adapting.
So do we think that we've seen, or have we seen processes change internally in terms of, given that you have that one at bat versus maybe multiple at bats in prior times, anything internally happening?
Well, I mean, I think when you see processes, I mean, I think it's probably a pretty common theme to be saying we got to move faster. I mean, the faster you can get through this and the decisions, and some products are doing a great job. I mean, we look at what's happening with some of the launches that we're seeing today. and they are moving faster, but we're probably still not quite as fast as we need to be there. I think you'll see centralization of some of these functions as one way bigger companies are dealing with it. Instead of each of the brands having responsibility, we'll have a sort of a central geographic unit handle it so you get some synergy across therapeutic areas. So yeah, I mean, we don't live in a world where people sort of just keep doing the same thing, but people are continuing to look at ways to do it better.
So we talked about the problem and now the result. So how does this uncertainty show up in these numbers when you're talking about your KPIs, your brand performance, overall business momentum? What's that impact? Ultimately, the long-term impact.
Well, again, you're not going to be hitting your KPIs if you don't have the right insight to make some of these decisions. Maybe on the opposite side to highlight this, we keep talking about sort of not making the right decisions. There's other instances where people are making the right decisions, right? But it's not based per se on the data. It's based on analogs that they've seen in the marketplace. This idea of like, I can learn over here and apply it over there. And some people are better at that than others, sort of going through. But I think that almost gives you a false sense of security because none of the analogs exactly fit the situation. But that's sort of the thought that comes to my mind is you're trying to sort of navigate. And it's also not like you make a wrong decision all the time. Like I said, wrong data in a phase 3 and it's a cliff that you fall off of. Some of these are sort of those small to medium sized decisions, like what's your first detail message that you're coming across with? Or when you're engaging with customers, what is the best way? What's the DTC message that you sort of got that you're sort of bringing out? I think the ability to beta test, as we've all seen, would be unbelievable way to do that. Maybe one other process change I didn't highlight. I do think pharma is real. They're trying, and they've tried, and part of my whole connected care program that Lilly was trying to do that is get closer to the user of your product. And there are different companies are trying different approaches to try to get closer to those individuals. And one of those reasons is they want the insights. They don't want to be just doing a separate market research. They want to be listening and talking and interacting with customers in a way that allows it to be longitudinal, allows it to not just be biased by those who decide to participate in market research, but it's actual customers that you can validate through your system.
You touched on something that I was going to bring up, which is the customer. What's the impact of this, right? If we are able to get to a point where these insights can be collected easier, faster, what's that impact for patients, for customers?
At the end of the day, you need to find the right product with the right patient at the right place. It's sort of the combination of all of those elements why this is so important. But for me, at the end of the day, if you can't find the person who needs your product or you built a product that wasn't the right product for the customers because you didn't listen to the right people as you're going out, it's just delaying improvement of outcomes. And that's why most of us are in this, is to develop the products that are going to change the outcomes for people living with, either acute or chronic conditions. So if I can have that insight, if I know exactly, where that pain point is for the person living with this condition, and I build that in all the way through from ideation through launch and then sort of through my life cycle plan, we're all going to be better off.
So in Marie Schiller's shoes, imagine the ideal world. What would it take to kind of move us from reactive decision-making to confident real-time activity?
Maybe I'll talk about two scenarios. One is where I've got a monitoring system. So once a week, I can go in, I can sort of be in listening mode, sort of seeing trends. And these are both, sales data and then sort of the whys behind it. Whereas I'm proactively saying there's some shifts going on in the market, right? Sometimes we talk about these 9-box scenarios where it's like what's going on in the drug side and then what's going on environmentally. I want that listening machine so I can sort of be moving my arrow up and down and just be ahead of it. So, and I want to follow people through a journey. I don't want to just have to keep going out and saying, okay, let's start a new market research study. I'm like, well, what would this person have said 6 months ago? I If we're doing cohort studies, retrospective, you have all sorts of bias and things that come into the equation when you're collecting that data. So I really want to do a prospective cohort study in this tool I have, and be able to pull those insights out in a way that gets me smarter. So I'm in more of a proactive mode versus a reaction mode. Knowing that that's gonna be hard to get, what would be my second ideal is that, okay, there is something that happens in a dynamic market, and instead of waiting, let's say, 4 weeks, and that's even optimistic, where I can go out, do a survey, or have my sales rep give me information, or do summits, whatever I'm gonna do to say, "Okay, let's pivot this way," that can be done in a couple days, right? I can sort of go to some source where I can quickly glean the why something is happening versus seeing the what and not knowing how to react to that.
So now you're walking into that leadership team meeting that you were referring to earlier on.
Well, I'm not
What?
even waiting for the leadership team meeting
Yeah.
now, Adam. Now what I'm
Yep.
doing is I'm like having my Monday morning coffee, and instead of just reading whatever I'm reading, I'm looking at my data and I'm like, wow, I should probably do something about that now. And sort of I'm the one calling the meeting with my boss or whoever, that decision making group, and first with my team, to say let's act on this. So it's agile at the right level when you're not sort of waiting in this waterfall mentality. So my dream would be we can get to that state.
I love that. Grab a cup of
Yeah.
coffee, take some action.
Take some action. Exactly.
Before we wrap, if you could give commercial brand leaders one piece of advice about decision making today, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess my piece of advice is, take a shepherd mentality versus a sheep. I know that it's hard to go out and try new approaches when processes have been there, and making something different than we've always done comes with big risks. But I truly believe that there are ways that we could be doing a little bit better than we're doing today. So I would just say be a shepherd and try to figure out a way that we can resolve this gap that's been there for a long time.
I love that. Thank you. Marie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining the studio, and we will catch up with you next time.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam.